Good evening, everyone. It is evening now. I'm Jeanne Shaheen. I'm co-leading this Senate and Congressional Delegation because we have Representative Kim, who is the Senator-elect from New Jersey, with us, with my colleague Jim Risch from Idaho. This is the 6th year that we have led this delegation to the Halifax Security Forum, and we're delighted this year to have another strong bipartisan delegation and to be joined by Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, Mike Rounds from South Dakota, Tim Kaine from Virginia, and as I said, Andy Kim, the Senator-elect from New Jersey. I have found this to be a very productive conversation at the Halifax Forum. It's been an opportunity for all of us, Senator Risch and I, to talk about the continued shared bipartisan values of our foreign policy. I think if you were listening to all of the members of the delegation who participated in panels, you would have heard that reinforced by everyone who spoke. I'm particularly honored to, along with Jim, to have received the Builders Award this year for our support for the Halifax Security Forum. And also just want to point out that I am particularly pleased to see that Vladimir Kara-Murza got the McCain Award. For all of us from the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate who worked very hard to support his release, it was so encouraging to see him here with Evgenia to receive that McCain Award. We've had a number of very positive talks with other representatives who are here. We had a very good discussion with Defense Minister Blair about defense spending, Canadian defense spending, and for our Canadian friends who are here. It was a positive discussion, but we reinforced our interest in seeing Canada increase its defense spending, particularly as you look at the threats to North America coming through the Arctic and through the North. And we talked about ways in which we can cooperate to do that. We had a very good meeting with former President Tsai from Taiwan, again, talking about how we can better work together in the future to counter threats from China. A number of meetings with some of our German friends and the President of Kosovo, and also with Admiral Bauer from NATO to talk about some of the challenges facing NATO. So I think it's been a very good visit here, as it usually is, and a great opportunity to see a lot of world leaders and to talk about the challenges that we face. So I will now turn it over to my co-lead, Senator Risch.
Thanks, Jeanne. First of all, let me say that we come here to meet with our Canadian friends. They are one of our closest allies, clearly, our largest trading partner, and we come here to talk about the things that we agree on and how we can move forward on them. The Canadian people have values that mirror the values of the people of the United States of America. That's why we are such close allies. It is because of the people of both countries. Much to your chagrin, you will find that we agree on almost everything. We have disagreements, as friends do from time to time. They are de minimis in the overall scheme of things, and obviously we talk about those and how to work through them. The biggest one, of course, has been, and the one that gets the most attention, is the commitment of everyone who's a member of NATO to meet a spending level of 2% of GDP. Canada is not there. Out of the 32 countries, 23 are. The rest are moving there quickly. Canada has committed to do that. We discussed the timeline for that happening, and I can tell you that they are in full agreement that they want to get there as quickly as they can. So I agree with Jane. It's been really good to meet not only with the Canadians but with the other allies that she identified. And I think as we go out of here, we will go out of here a lot better than we came in. Thank you. Who's up? Amy?
I am. Thank you. I thank our great leaders here. I actually chair the Canadian-American Interparliamentarian Group on the American side, with Senator Crapo in the Senate. And I plan on actually coming back to Canada in the next few months, hopefully to catch the new professional women's hockey team game. As we know, there's 3 teams already on each side. I will note that Minnesota won the national championship. And so we're pretty excited about that. And there are many things that bring our country together. Obviously, we are going to have to re-up the USMCA. That trade agreement was reached under former and future President Trump. That will be coming up in 2026. So that's going to be on our minds as we work on Canadian-American issues. I see our ambassador, Ambassador Cohen, is here. We're so proud of his work. Last night, in addition to meeting with the Defense Minister of Canada yesterday, we also met with the Foreign Minister till late into the night, as well as Ambassador Hillman, the Canadian ambassador to the U.S. So these relationships are strong. I always remember it was the Canadian Embassy, and only the Canadian Embassy, when some times were tough years back, that had displayed the banners on their beautiful, beautiful building, the closest to the Capitol, friend, ally, partner. And while we always will, as Senator Risch pointed out, have some disagreements on things, and we're going to be pushing for good reason on the defense spending, given what we're seeing all over the world. That friendship is strong. Secondly, you see a delegation that is here on a really strongly bipartisan basis, right? Coming out of this election, if some of you around the world noticed, and our local American reporters know, it wasn't the easiest election for anyone. I know I was in it. But here we are with a strong bipartisan message. Our support for Ukraine with the horrific invasion by Vladimir Putin and the Russians, our support for our allies, our support for NATO. And I've been really impressed by my colleagues. I've watched every panel they were in, our friends up here. I'm excited about Senator Shaheen's and Senator Risch's good friendship for foreign relations. That matters. Personal relationship matters, or we wouldn't be here. And also excited that, are you the first woman in this? Yes. To be one of the top leaders. I'd never ask a question where you don't know the answer, but I just did, of that committee. So thank you very much for allowing me to say a few words.
Okay. Thank you. Mike Rounds out of South Dakota, a neighbor to Minnesota, but we have the great faces and great places in our state, the Rushmore State. Look, first of all, thanks for just the opportunity to say just a few words, and I couldn't agree more with what my colleagues up here have said. You know, in Washington, there's always this question about whether or not we're fighting with one another and everything is a partisan issue. It is not. We really do. In the Senate, we actually get along with one another. We work together on projects, and a huge amount of the reason for that is because we know that in order to get anything done, the vast majority of the work we do has got to be done on a 60-vote margin. And that means you work across the aisles to get your legislation through. The other piece is that we really do agree with a whole lot more than what we disagree on. And one of the areas that you can't tell the difference between Republicans and Democrats on is behind closed doors on the Defense Committee or on the Intel Committee. And we think that's going to continue on in the same fashion. The other piece that I just want to share with you, I know that there's been discussions out there about as if there's a conflict with regard to how much each country should be spending on the defense. And for years, we've talked about a minimum amount of 2% should be spent on defense and so forth. But there's something else that's happened here just recently, over the last couple of years, really. And that is a recognition by all of the members of NATO that it's not so much a matter of whether or not we should meet 2%. It's more a matter of what is it going to take to remain free. And what's it going to take to keep us out of a world war? And that's been a lot of the discussion we've had today is what are our needs going to be if we're going to be successful in keeping, democracies throughout Europe and around the rest of the world. And 2%, because of the adversaries that we face and because of the organizations that have now joined together to where if we end up in one of those very serious world conflicts, the United States will find itself facing adversaries not on one front, but on two or more fronts. And our allies recognize that. And so it's going to be a matter of everybody, whatever we do now to prepare ourselves for that, and our adversaries see that, that may very well help keep us out of a world war. And so a lot of the discussions that we've had have not been so much based on whether or not everybody's going to make it 2%. A lot of the discussion has been on what does it take to keep the supply lines open? What does it take for the munitions that we're going to need until we can open up the larger lines of munitions processing should a conflict actually explode in front of us? And what did we learn from what has happened in Ukraine? What have we learned as a NATO organization that will help keep us safer in the future? And a lot of the discussion today has been along those lines. So appreciate what you've got, and I've really appreciated the conversations we've had, not just in the plenaries themselves. And once again, we've all been had a chance to watch each other on these plenaries, and there's very few times in which we've taken exception with what other folks have set up here. But I also want to say the bilaterals that we've done, in addition to that, have been extremely helpful just to, once again, reset the stage, let everybody know that everything is going to be okay, that we're moving forward, and that there is a consistency within the Senate, and we believe there will be a consistency within the House as we move into the next line and welcome former President Trump back in as the president-elect.
It's good to be back in Halifax. This is my 7th time, but my first since 2021. Like Amy and Andy just came through an election, so these poor folks are inflicted by me for another 6 years. Since 2021, a lot's happened. The 2021 meeting in Halifax, of all the ones that I attended, was the most memorable because we had a set of meetings in November of 2021 with our allies, NATO allies, and others in Europe. And I came home that weekend thinking I had never seen as big a gap in our predictions about the future between the United States and many of our allies. We were saying at the time that we believed Russia was going to invade Ukraine. And folks who were here, including Ukrainians, were telling us, you guys don't stress out, don't overreact, don't be too dramatic. We all had the same intel. We were making very different predictions, and that was extremely palpable and vivid when we were here. But the fact that we were making different predictions didn't stop us as allies and friends from nevertheless making preparations. And so the incredible resolve of the Ukrainian people in February of 2022 is the main reason that they have successfully thwarted Vladimir Putin's ambitions. But another reason that they were able to do it is even though we had different predictions about what would happen, we were able to pre-negotiate a number of the consequences: sanctions, termination of Nord Stream 2, delivery of humanitarian aid, plans for delivering military aid. And that weekend in Halifax and the months after taught me that when we share information and we dialogue with our allies, we may have different opinions about what's going to happen, but we nevertheless can cooperate and work to the good of security of our region, our nations, and the world. The second thing that's happened along and related to the first is a renewed commitment to NATO. 2 new nations are part of NATO, Sweden and Finland, nations that never would have been. It would have been inconceivable if you followed public polling in these nations even 5 years ago that they would be such strong members of NATO now. And the Congress has affirmed in a bill that was passed last year that I co-sponsored with Senator Rubio, who's now nominated to be Secretary of State, that the Article I branch is squarely behind the continued existence and support for NATO. And this is not just a matter for the Article II branch to decide, but it's one that the Article I branch is invested in as well. And that was a vote last year that was strongly bipartisan in both houses. Those are 2 aspects of the world that have changed since I last came, and I think they're both laudatory. Many, many challenges, but these challenges are easy to solve when we sit down with each other and when we sit down with nations with whom we're allies, and that's what this weekend's about. Andy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Kim. I'm a congressman of the New Jersey 3rd and senator-elect from New Jersey. First of all, I just want to thank my future colleagues. Thank you, Senator Shaheen, Senator Risch, and everyone else for the invitation to be able to join up. This is my first, in many ways, my first official act as a senator-elect. And I have to say, it's been so...
They all have lobster.
Yes, apparently so, exactly. But I have to say, it's been really wonderful to be able to spend this type of time getting to know my colleagues and having conversations, many of us for the first time getting to know each other. And I just want to reinforce just what was said earlier. Like, there is such a deep sense of bipartisanship in the interactions that I've already had with the Senate, a real understanding of the gravity of this moment, but also the responsibility that comes with the job. That we get to work jobs whose job descriptions are in the Constitution of the United States, and everyone that I've talked to here is certainly humbled by that opportunity, as well as what we're trying to get done. I think about this right now as I'm going to be heading home tomorrow and thinking about what to be able to express to my constituents about why it is that I came here and what it is that I heard. And I think I want to just start by saying back to my constituents that I hope that they see that in this very precarious time with so many conflicts and crises going on, I hope they are reassured by the strength of the important alliances that our country has forged and the type of work that it takes to be able to maintain and be able to strengthen those. And I think that this event today that we've been to over the course of this weekend is part of that effort. You cannot take alliances for granted. You cannot take these moments for granted in terms of how it is that we're going to respond. And I think we have all been understanding that we live, unfortunately, in a very historic moment globally, and it's on us to try to think through what it is. These conflicts and these crises are not going to solve themselves. So I feel reassured coming out from Halifax in our conversations, both in the plenary as well as the bilaterals, in terms of the seriousness with which our allies and leaders are approaching this, and their commitments to be able to make the type of investment needed to be able to follow this through. And I assure you, this isn't going to be something where once we're back in our capitals that we'll forget about the conversations that we had. I'm reassured by the continued actions of our ambassador here, as well as building the ties going forward in terms of how we're going to be able to follow up. So a lot going on, not just on Ukraine, but also deep conversations about what next when it comes to China. I think these are going to be conversations that are going to be all the more important over the course of this transition in America over the coming weeks. And I hope that this team that has been up here on the stage will be able to help pass this message back to the U.S. Senate and help lead us in that transition. Thank you.
Thank you all. We'd be happy to answer questions.
We have time for one.
Senator Risch will do all of the questions about the incoming administration.
Please state your name, your outlet, two mics at the back, and we'll do one question, one follow-up.
My question is for Senator Risch. My name is Valérie. Excuse me. I'm from Radio-Canada. So if ever you don't understand all the words I say, my first language is French. So just be patient with me.
A lot of people don't understand me either, so it's not a problem.
You told yesterday you're a good friend of President-elect Trump. I'm just wondering and curious to know, what do you going to share to Mr. Trump about the discussion you had over the weekend, either with your colleagues and with, for example, Minister Jolie?
I guess I didn't quite understand. Restate the question.
You told yesterday you are a good friend.
Yes, I got all that part. What's the question?
What do you gonna share with him about the discussion you had over the weekend?
Well, obviously I won't unless there's something very specific comes up. But this is part of the general knowledge that you take home. And if questions come up about where we are with our relationship with Canada or with other allies we've met, I'll be happy to share with him what my views are. And with this president, he's very open to those kinds of things. You don't always agree and might spar back and forth. End of the day, he's still the president, you're not. And he is always been good as far as listening to what people say that have been actually on the front listening to issues. So I will, I'm not going to take anything very specific back, but obviously we will be having general conversations about the level of spending in NATO. We've picked up a lot of conversations here about that. I can characterize it, I think, for him in a sentence or two, and that'll be helpful.
Are you going to leave Halifax more confident than you were when you arrived?
I think so. I think I always leave here more confident than when I arrived. Our relationship with Canada is strong. It's always good to come here and reinvigorate that relationship. And I think that's particularly true. The comments were made about NATO. Look, NATO is the strongest military alliance in the history of the world. Lots of people would like to belong to NATO. Those of us that do belong to NATO make agreements such as the 2%. It's good to talk about those things. And certainly what Putin did when he invaded Ukraine really reinvigorated NATO and has strengthened NATO. And a number of us here were people who carried the water trying to get Sweden and Finland in, and we got that done. NATO today is stronger than it has ever been.
Hi, Alex Ward, Wall Street Journal. Before the question, Senator Kaine, welcome back to a place that certainly knows your name. My question is a bit broad, but there's been consensus pretty much from all of you and from many people, allies speaking here, that there should be no final deal between Ukraine and Russia without Ukrainian approval, that they, no talks without Ukraine. I'm curious on the Putin side of this deal. I mean, Senator Rounds, you spoke very passionately about how you don't really trust Putin's intentions in not only these talks, but really in any negotiations. How have your conversations been here about the Putin side of it all? How do you get to a deal that you feel could be actually lasting from the Russian side? And do you have any parameters on what you'd like to see and what that final deal looks like? Yeah.
I'm going to try, okay? First of all, to try to state what you believe to be true, which is that I do not believe that Vladimir Putin has the capability in this particular case to accept the defeat that he would have and go back home and tell them that he was successful after losing the number of lives that he has and not having taken over what he considered to be his country, but what he found out was a free Ukraine. And I think we have to face the fact that not all wars end in a peace agreement. Sometimes there is a loss which one country has to accept. And Mr. Putin may very well find out that he is not going to win this war. And it may very well be a case of where, as everybody watches, he may not be able to accept the terms necessary to consider it a victory. So I think what we all have to be aware of is we may not know what the strategic path is forward in order to claim total victory today in Ukraine. But what we do know is that any attempt to negotiate with Mr. Putin right now, many of us believe would be fruitless because he does not have the ability to go back home and survive in a leadership position in Russia necessarily if he is seen as not meeting his original objective. Remember, he told everybody this was basically an action, not a war. And he also clearly believed that he would be welcomed with open arms. He clearly was not properly informed. He also totally underestimated the desire by a free people to keep their country. That says a lot. And I think that misunderstanding is going to be a lot more difficult for Mr. Putin to recover from. So for those of us out on the outside looking at this, to suggest that we know how you could provide him with any alternative other than defeat is going to be extremely difficult because he may not be able to accept any terms of peace that would allow him to maintain his control within his own country.
So if I may, just taking from what you've just said, it sounds like you would recommend effectively, not that there shouldn't be some sort of diplomatic engagement, but that any actual peace talk should perhaps be pushed down the line until the Ukrainians are in a stronger position. Is that a fair summation of your view?
I think that's what's occurring right now. I think Russia is pushing hard to try to gain an advantage, and at the same time, one of the reasons why there was an incursion into Russia was because the Ukrainians understood that they needed to have the ability to negotiate, if at all possible, having something that he wanted as well. Whether or not that's a successful move by either of the two is yet to be determined. But what I do know is this: even though we don't see the strategic path today, what we do know is that victory is one in which Ukraine remains free and a democracy, and a victory for Ukraine is a defeat for Mr. Putin. And then the question is, how does Mr. Putin maintain his control over Russia after the assurances he's given them that he would be successful? So it's a very, very challenging time, but I don't know the answer in terms of how we get there. All I know is that the outcome is one that may very well not be anything except victory for Ukraine in keeping their country.
Thank you.
Justin Ling, freelance. I'm actually following up on that question for Senators Rounds and Risch, because I think you'll be best placed to talk to it. We've seen reports over the last day that the president's considering Richard Grenell as a possible envoy for the peace process. Grenell has talked in the past about creating autonomous zones in Ukraine, about freezing the line of contact where they are. If that is where the administration is going in terms of a peace deal, do you think you'll be able to convince the president that it may be foolhardy to trust Putin's intentions there? If the deal is done, a bit of a double barrel question, I'm sorry. If the deal is done, how do you create security guarantees for Ukraine to ensure that Russia does not basically reconstitute and push that forward again?
Yeah, I think you're over your skis on this. The suggestion that Rich Grenell will be the envoy may or may not be accurate, and I think that anything he has said in the past regarding it probably ought to be put on the shelf until they get to the point where they are starting to talk about it. But I don't think this is anywhere near, this cake isn't baked yet, and it's got a long, long ways to go. So I think everybody needs to be patient. You've heard me say before, we need to give the president the space to go to work on this. I think speculation and that sort of thing isn't going to get us very far. So the point, I can't really answer your question. I don't. There's nothing there I'd really want to speculate on, and that's what I got to say. Yeah.
Look, excuse me. I agree with Senator Risch that neither of us should speak for the president and suggest out loud as to what his strategy will be. What I think we can say is that it's been very clear that President Trump does not want to see loss of life. He cares deeply about the fact that he hates war, and I think a lot of people here today hate the idea of war continuing. We don't want to see people dying. I totally agree that we should try to avoid loss of life wherever possible. But we've also seen that the president very clearly understands where there is negotiations and where there can't be negotiations. I don't think Mr. Putin has proven himself to be solid in terms of that we can trust his negotiations, and if there is a movement to create a time period or a ceasefire, it would give Ukraine the opportunity to rebuild. It would also give him the opportunity to rebuild, and I think that's got to go into the context of whether or not that's a good deal and whether or not it would actually provide a long-term peace agreement. Once again, it's not that any of us up here want to see more bloodshed, but we also can't be ignorant about what we see Mr. Putin capable of doing and what his long-term diabolical approach would be.
And fair enough, but we've heard both Minister Joly, we've also heard from the Minister of State from Germany talk about the need for security guarantees, whatever the future holds for Ukraine, whenever a deal is done. On the specifics of security guarantees, is there something you expect from Europe, from Canada?
Let me try one more, okay?
Okay.
And then I'm going to give it right back. Remember, there was an agreement made by Russia, the United States, and other members in Europe that promised Ukraine a peace agreement when they gave up their nuclear weapons. Well, guess who broke it? It wasn't any one of the allies that we have. It was Russia, and it was specifically Mr. Putin. That tells you the reason why we are very suspect of any offers of security agreements by Mr. Putin at this time.
Yeah, and listen, the one piece of information that you should take back with you is that there is continued bipartisan support in the Senate for Ukraine.
Thanks.
And this will be the last question.
Hi, Senators. My name is Emily Hawes. I work for CPAC. President Trump has promised across-the-board tariffs of at least 10%. Do you expect Canada will be included in that?
No.
You know, one of the things that's happened since the last, excuse me, tariffs were imposed is the negotiation of USMCA, which we may be at there will be a review of that treaty, obviously, but we think it's important, as we've all said, Canada is a very important trading partner of ours. We think we need to cooperate as we look at going forward, how to make sure that USMCA continues in a way that benefits both of our countries.
Let me take a short shot at that.
Sure.
The agreement that we have now was negotiated by President Trump. He did it before. It's up for renegotiation. He's going to have to negotiate it again. I think history tells us that they'll be able to reach an agreement. I'm confident they will.
Thank you all.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.